Welcome back to the Hill Update. My name is Dean Allison and I'm your host. Last week we talked about Bill C-10. As you may have heard, Bill C-10 would amend the Broadcasting Act to allow the CRTC to regulate internet content. Bill C-10 is legislation by the federal government that aims to regulate social media, websites, blogs, TV, radio, and the press. A spokesperson for Canadian Heritage Minister says that one goal of the proposed law is to ensure that big streaming services pay their fair share. The bill is aimed at ensuring they contribute to the creation, production, and discoverability of Canadian content. But that's not how everyone else sees it. In fact, there has been strong reaction to the bill, both in Parliament and in the broader public. The fear is that C-10 could infringe on the freedom of expression. The backlash has been so strong that Heritage Minister Steven Guilbeault says the government will bring forward an amendment to make it clear that content users upload to social media sites will not be regulated. There's been many articles written and several excellent interviews on the subject in the last week. From a past CRTC vice chair to national newspaper editorial boards to a Canadian research chair in internet and e-commerce law, the opposition to Bill C-10 has been widespread. Even the NDP, who have supported the bill so far, have joined with the Conservatives in calling for an updated charter statement on the proposed legislation. For those of us that need a reminder, our right to freedom of expression is enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Section 2B. It says, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communications. What is the purpose of enshrining this right in our Constitution? The Department of Justice gives us this answer. The protection of the freedom of expression is premised upon the fundamental principle and values that promote the search for and the attainment of truth, participation in social and political decision-making, and the opportunity for individual self-fulfillment through expression. The Supreme Court of Canada has maintained that the connection between freedom of expression and the political process is perhaps the linchpin of Section 2B protection. Free expression is valued above all as being instrumental to democratic governance. The two other rationales for protecting freedom of expression: one, encouraging the search for truth through the open exchange of ideas, and fostering individual self-actualization, thus directly engaging individual human dignity, are also key values that animate Section 2B analysis. So why did the government remove or attempt to remove a clause that protected user-generated content from the legislation? A senior official with the Canadian Heritage Department said that removing the protection could make user-generated content subject to CRTC regulations. This would mean that each platform would be required to enforce the regulations on the content. Minister Guilbeault has not been able to explain why the clause was removed by the committee controlled by his own party. He adds that the intent of the bill is not to regulate content uploaded by Canadians, and so the clause was unnecessary. However, he has not yet articulated why the clause was included in the bill in the first place. Rex Murphy, writing for the National Post, had this to say: only a PM and a bunch that carry the delusion they are all wise and ever right could have conceived Bill C-10. He also warns that the Liberals' dangerous arrogance didn't begin and won't end with the Internet Regulation Bill. The thinking that spawned C-10 will remain. This assumption would be in line with the now infamous statement of the PM, where he said that he admired China's basic dictatorship. Having said that, there are bills the government has put forward during this pandemic that have been effective, and there are others that have been done poorly. We must give credit where credit is due and to point out the mistakes when they happen. There needs to be a balance and there needs to be accountability. But there is no balance warranted in the case of Bill C-10. There should never be an argument in favor of curtailing our fundamental freedoms in the way that Bill C-10 attempted to do. Joining me on the show today is a Member of Parliament for York Simcoe, Scot Davidson. Scott started his business career as a restaurateur and then went on to operate several successful businesses. Scott was elected in a by-election in February and re-elected in October of 2019. Joining me on the show today, we have Scot Davidson, the Member of Parliament for York Simcoe. Scott, thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about the budget a little bit, but tell me, where are you right now?
Well, thanks, MP Allison. How you doing, everyone? I am actually live in, Dean, what I like to call the soup and salad bowl of Canada. I'm in the Holland Marsh. The Holland Marsh is part of York Simcoe, so we're about 40 minutes north of Toronto. And we go up to the South Shore of Lake Simcoe, representing Bradford, West Gwillimbury, East Gwillimbury, and Georgina. It's a great riding, and we love our carrots.
Excellent, excellent. So we had the budget a couple of weeks ago. There's been some time to think about it. Talk to me about your initial thought process on the budget.
Well, Dean, you and I both know that this was a massive spending budget. I mean, truly, this was an election budget. When you actually take a look at it now, I mean, $100 billion of spending, $381 billion. You know, you and I both know we've got small businesses that were really hurting. You know, there still is some help in the budget for small businesses with the wage subsidy and certain things, but I was looking for a lot more when it comes to that, and a lot more targeted spending for our sectors that we know are hit. And, you know, you and I both know that small business has borne the brunt of this pandemic.
So when you talk about sectors that you will like to see more support for, why don't you just tell us specifically what what it would have been nice to see?
Well, we know the travel industry has completely been devastated. The airline sector, small airlines up north. I mean, the tourism sector for sure is one. You know, I've got a lot of friends in Northern Ontario. They're actually going to miss another year. They're going to be shuttered for 2 years. And there really wasn't enough help at all for them. We know, Dean, you know, we have to have targeted help. And, you know, the Conservatives have been calling for that. We called for the increase in the wage subsidy and those things that help small business. But some of this out of control spending now by the Liberals that isn't targeted, you know, you're not getting the bang for the buck spent. And that's what I was looking for. And there's a number of other things there locally we're looking for. And it really was a lunchbox letdown for York Simcoe.
So let's talk because you did talk about some deficits. You threw around some big numbers. You threw on 100 billion, 350 billion, 1.4, 1.5 trillion. Talk to us in terms of the numbers as it relates to our GDP. How do we service it? Any concerns if interest rates go up? Talk to us about the overall spending and what that means to us as Canadians.
Well, Dean, I think, you know, talking even locally when I'm out today, you know, I passed a pickup truck and the guy basically laughed at me and said, Scott, look at this. I got $10,000 worth of lumber in the back of my little pickup truck. People are concerned about the inflation that's being created here with the price of lumber. And like I said, I'm in the marsh now. Farmers are concerned about the price of vegetables, our food security, all of these sort of things. And, you know, first-time homebuyers, people buying a house, have to qualify for a stress test. You know, I'm wondering, should there be a stress test for this Liberal government? You know, because people are really concerned right now about these big numbers and the government printing, the Bank of Canada, $6 billion a week, and we've got a repricing of assets. So you can create a situation quickly where you have the haves and the have-nots.
So when I talk about, what's good to service debt, you know, there's numbers thrown around 27% of GDP. We're going to see that number climb up north of 50% in terms of debt. So that kind of makes us vulnerable. I mean, interest rates really are at an all-time low. So talk to me about what happens if interest rates change over the coming years or the coming, obviously as we continue to pile debt on. We got about a minute left in this segment.
Yeah, well, you and I both know, and Canadians know this well. I mean, people, my mom and dad, they had to do a mortgage of 21% in 1975. We know moving forward that interest rates can change, and those massive interest rate payments that you can have to service the federal debt later, is going to cut in on much needed social programs and much needed help for small business. So again, that's why I was looking for the federal government really to take a stress test and have a hard look at the spending. Like $100 billion in spending, Dean. You and I both know this prime minister has spent more now than every prime minister put together. Like, it's truly unbelievable.
So here's what we'll do, Scott. When we come back from break, let's talk a little bit about how this could be paid back. You know, there was very little mention in the budget about taxes in general. Maybe we could share some of those things. But when we come back for break, let's talk about how exactly this may end up being paid back in the future. Joining us on the show today is Scot Davidson, the Member of Parliament for York Simcoe and also the Conservative Caucus Chair for Ontario. Scott, we talked in the first segment a little bit about the amount of staggering debt. You talked about the fact that this seemed like an election budget because there was a lot of goodies, a lot of spending. What we have not heard, I mean, there was not a whole lot of mention in the budget in terms of tax increases. I know we've heard a lot. Anecdotally, we've seen a lot talked about as we hear about how we're going to pay for this. But really, there was no mention of that. And I think that seems a little bit misleading to me because at the end of the day, we've got to pay this back. So what are your thoughts around what that could look like as we move forward?
No, thanks, Dean. I think the government was looking for, this to be this big growth budget. And I mean, clearly, we've seen that based on what they've put out, that is not going to be the case. And, on the revenue side, the only thing, the government will point to is HST on big web giants. And of course, you and I know they have to pay their fair share. That's going to be passed on to consumers. And also, they've said, oh, well, we're doing a 1%, buyer's tax on foreign home ownership in Canada. That is a big problem in my riding. And you and I both know that 1% is just going to become a cost of doing business for those people. And it really did not go far enough. And, on the revenue side, as I move, Dean, I got to tell you, no one talks about the revenue side. We know we've had the travel business shuttered, hotels, all these taxes that would normally come in. And even downtown, I was in downtown Bradford. My heart breaks all the time for these. We've got shuttered businesses now. And even, moving through, we haven't seen the full extent of the pandemic on these closed businesses. Even for municipalities, there are taxes that are going to be coming in on these businesses. There's going to be a ton of vacant taxes claimed back for last year. So we haven't seen the full effect of this yet.
I think it's one thing we fail to put in context is this last year has been devastating for small businesses. We've lost a lot of tax base, as you just mentioned. And, I know there's been a couple of ideas floated out there. We've heard possibly capital gains taxes on houses. We've heard possibly estate and death taxes. Any thoughts on that? I mean, when you spend in a budget, but you have no way of paying it back, or there doesn't seem to be any way, that does seem to me like the shock could come in the sticker price if there's an election, and should the Liberals be successful in the majority government, that I think people would be in for a big surprise.
And that's all the things, that you and I talk about in the House of Commons. These are the concerns we have. The Liberals will look at us and say we're fear-mongering. When I walk around my riding, these are common sense questions that Canadians ask. And that's what we're trying to get answers to. Are you going to come after our principal residents on taxes? Because you and I both know today's deficits are tomorrow's taxes. And there is no way around that at all. So they are going to have to find ways to pay for this. And, that's why our Prime Minister, Trudeau, is pushing for an election now. He wants an election to get his majority. And then we're going to see these things come in later. And that's why you and I have been standing up in the House of Commons for boots on the ground Canadians and talking about these important issues.
That's great. Now, we talked a bit in the first segment as well in terms of what wasn't there. Let's talk a bit more about, maybe some more things that could have happened for some of the most affected sectors. And we started touching on it in the first segment. What are some of the things that could have been done to help some of these segments and some of these sectors get kickstarted?
Well, we want it, especially I've talked about it, We wanted to see a reopening plan for the economy, even incorporated in the budget, to give people some hope, Dean, and to get some of these people back to work. I've had restaurants in my ridings that have had to close, open, close. They've bought inventory, fresh inventory. They've hired people. I have a number of people that have called my office. They were hired back for 2 weeks. Now they're laid off for 2 weeks. A lot of these businesses are in a desperate situation, and the need for hope is huge. I was looking even for an inspirational budget that we're going to reach out to these targeted sectors like the travel business, like the airline business, like the tourism business. Come out with a small fares program for rural Ontario to get things started again and actually give some people some hope in how we're going to get this thing reopened responsibly. Small businesses spend a lot of money, as you know, Dean, on, plexiglass and making people feel safe. And they just want to see that pass forward and with targeted spending for those sectors that really need it.
That's great. Scott, when we come back, we're going to take a quick break. Let's talk about maybe some more ideas that we could offer up in terms of getting this economy restarted. Joining me on the Hill Update this week is Scot Davidson, a member of Parliament for York Simcoe. Scott, just before the break, this is our last segment. We were talking about some of the things that were probably missing from the budget, the chance to restart the economy and have a bit of a pathway forward. We still have no idea when and what that's going to look like. Talk to me about what you think some of the big misses were and as we go forward.
Well, locally, Dean, and I know you're a great local MP as well, we represent our constituents. And again, I'm standing in the Holland Marsh, soup and salad bowl of Canada. And one thing I was looking for, we were looking for financial protection, a packet trust that was of no cost to the government to put in security for fresh produce farmers. Basically, they would become secured creditors. So we could maximize our planning without a bankruptcy having and fear for our farmers not getting paid, because we had a lot of farmers in the marsh not planting their fields fully because they were worried about getting paid. That was one thing we were looking for, and that was a big miss, I feel. It should have been in the free trade agreement. The other thing that was a miss, Dean, healthcare. The Liberals like to talk about a dental plan, and we all know dental is important, but the truth of the matter is I represent York Simcoe. I'm one of the only federal ridings without a hospital. A lot of people don't have doctors. And they're like, Scott, before we spend $18 billion on pharmacare, I would love to have a doctor and somewhere to go. And we've seen with this pandemic that healthcare is priority number one. So I was looking for, obviously, an increase in healthcare transfers to the province to work and help ridings like myself. I also, I represent a First Nations here, Chippewas of Georgina Island. They've been on a boiled water advisory, Dean, for 20 years. Think about that, 40 minutes from Toronto, and they still are. And the minister will say, well, we've committed X amount of money for First Nations. But again, I wanted targeted money to say that my First Nations is going to be looked at. So again, that was another huge mess. And sorry to go on and on. I could keep going, Dean, but we had a huge mess on Lake Simcoe. I believe in boots on the ground environmental projects. We had called for the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund to be reinstated, that the Liberals promised. It was in the minister's mandate letter to do that. And again, that wasn't done. This was a boots on the environmental policy for Lake Simcoe and many ridings around it. 500,000 people get their drinking water from that lake. And it's so important that we look after it. So that was another big miss that we were looking for, and it didn't happen.
So it is interesting. You talked about healthcare. The reality is that healthcares have been stretched through this pandemic all across the country. But what you said is correct. There's been actually no new money for healthcare in general at all. Is that correct?
No, that's right. That's not at all, and that all stems into vaccines, Dean. I mean, we've seen this government fumble with the vaccines procurements, and again, Canadians are asking me, where is our domestic capacity? How did we let that erode away? That's what's happened in Canada. We pride ourselves as being number one. I say that about farmers. You know, you can move a General Motors plant, but you can't move a farm. We are blessed with great farmland. We are blessed with great innovation in Canada, and we have to be number one.
Got about 30 seconds left, Scott. Any advice in terms of what some of the things we should have been looking for? Again, that would have been helpful.
Well, again, we need a reopening plan. We needed more targeted spending for those sectors that have been so hurt, and for those businesses that have been so hurt. I mean, I'm like you, Dean. My heart is with small business. My heart is with farmers. I always pull for everyone in the riding. I mean, Dean, I even got my rubber boots on today. I'm in the march. I just threw on a shirt and tie to come on your show. But I'm forever like you are out pulling for the Canadian that's out there that's just grinding it out. He's trying to get by. He's grinding it out, working hard, and that's what I always will continue to do.
Well, Scott, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Take care.
So there you have it. We had lots of spending in this budget, almost 1.5 trillion spent, and yet the concerns are still that we could have probably done more in terms of a plan to reopen the economy. So as we continue over the coming weeks and months, we need to be sensitive to small business and all those that have been affected by this pandemic and figure out ways to help them get it started, reopened in a safe way. Thank you for joining me on the Hill Update this week.